Hi everybody. What I thought I might do now is go over how we can recreate this pencil sketch style illustration. This is something that we're going to do in Photoshop, and it's a bit of fun. And there's a few little steps to it, but what the end result will be is something very cool. So it could be a farm scene, it could be a river or a landscape or windmill, anything like that. So this is what I've created, and I've created it from this image. Okay, so any image will work, but uh, you do want an image that has a fair bit of contrast and darks and lights, essentially. Okay, now before we go ahead and make this illustration, what I'm going to do is make a new layer, because I actually want to create a brush. Now I'm going to grab a brush from my brush library. I'm just going to create the most basic little series of lines here, and as you can see, I'm just setting up my brush. I'm just going to show you, I'm just creating just a nice small brush, something like this, and I'm just creating a series of 4 very straightish lines, and it doesn't matter if they're not straight. I mean, it doesn't matter if they're perfect, it gives it a bit of character. So there is what I've created. I'm sure that's pretty straightforward. We can all do that, I hope. So that's all I've done so far. I'm going to get my selection, my marquee selection, and I'm going to drag off a selection just like that. And I'm going to drop into my edit menu in Photoshop's menu, edit, and I'm going to define that as my brush preset. Boom, I've created a brush. Fantastic. That's great, because that's sort of what we need to do. I won't be needing that anymore. I've made my brush. And when we paint with our brush now, it's going to do this, which sort of is what we want, but we're going to need to change some settings in our brush menu. So I'm going to go into my brush menu, and I'm going to change some of these settings. Now, for me, these top 3 settings are possibly the most important ones that you'll encounter with Photoshop. So I'm just going to go from the top. Brush tip shape. I'm going to have some spacing. I want to have some spacing in my brush. So anything that feels good to you, something like that, that's fine. You decide yourself. Second one down. I'm going to have a bit of size variation in my brush. So not all of my strokes are the exact same size. Okay, so that's going to be just fine like that. A little bit of randomization. And I'm also going to want a little bit of angle jitter, which means that, not all my strokes are in the exact same sort of way. It's giving me variation. Beautiful. That might be all we need to do. Then perhaps a little bit of scattering. So I might have a little bit of scattering on my brush profile. So maybe a bit of that, bit of randomization. Okay, so we've got our brush set up, and when we paint now with our brush, it's going to do something like this. And this is sort of what we want our brush to be doing. If yours looks a bit like that, you're on the right track. Fantastic. All right, so we need to go ahead and get our image. So I'm going to go and bring this image up. This is what I'm be using for this exercise. And again, it's got a bit of lights and darks and tones and things. And I want to make a selection. So I'm going to use the selection menu, and I want to select the color range. And this is how we can isolate part of an image. Now, when you jump into here, you'll have different options to pick. You might pick colors, but I'm going to pick shadows. So that's what I'm after, shadows. And I'm going to be able to play with these sliders to sort of, get what I want, essentially. So the white area is that's being indicated. So whatever's white will be what I have selected. Okay, so you can just sort of play with that a little bit till you feel you've got something right. And it's a bit of trial and error. I like to leave my fuzziness about the mid-length, but something like that. And again, trial and error. And anyway, that looks pretty reasonable to me. So there we go. We have our selection made from the shadows or the darks, in this case, of this image. So essentially I don't need that anymore. And what I'm going to do is create a new layer now. I've got a brand new layer. I'll turn that on. And now I'm going to be painting into that area. So my brush might just be a little bit big. I'm going to pop that down a little bit. And there we go. So I can start to paint into that area. And that's starting to, you know, get that hatched sort of sketchy look. And, you know, I'm just going to pick up these darks, especially around some of the more detailed areas. You might want to get a few more darks in there. There I go. So I'm just going to start to paint into my selection. And off I go, just la-di-da, painting and painting. And you don't want to paint the whole image out. You want it to look a bit sketchy. You don't want to fill that whole area up. It'll look a little bit false. So I'm just going to carry on a little bit till I feel like I'm getting what I want. That looking good, looking good. There we go. So a bit more maybe in the back of his hair, and might bring some of that detail out. And as I say, you don't want to paint the whole thing and let it be a bit sketchy. Make it look like a sketch, a pencil sketch or something like that. And a few more little bits and pieces. We're good. So that's our pencil sketch. So we are done with that part of the exercise. So we've made our pencil sketch, which is fantastic. Okay, so we've finished the first stage of our illustration. So this is great. We're going to take this now into Illustrator, and we're going to put some graphics around it and sort of bring this thing together as a finished graphic. So I'm going to select this layer. So Command A on your keyboard, Command A with your layer selected, Command A, and that will bring up your selection. Copy, Command C, and I'm going to pop into Illustrator, and I'm going to create a new document, and it really doesn't matter what size this is, and there it is there. And I'm just going to paste in our graphic. So the integration between Illustrator and Photoshop is fabulous. We've got the ability to do cool things in Photoshop, and we can bring this into Illustrator. So we're going to create a little label here. I'm going to create a little rum label or whiskey label, something like that. You could make a wine label or anything. But so what I thought I might do is just put him to one side. Now, just some very basic things about Illustrator. You've got your shape tools, very common shapes, and we're going to manipulate some of these things as we go. So I'm going to start off with maybe a rectangle. And there we go, just like so. And one thing in Illustrator, everything has attributes. Attributes meaning the stroke, in this case, which is the outline. And if I click onto the one behind, I have the fill of that object. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill that with a colour, like so. And I think that I might have a path or a stroke around this object. So I'm going to double click into that. Maybe I have a slightly bluer stroke. And at the top of my screen, I have the ability to increase the stroke width. So I'm going to have that. I think that will look nice. Very good, very good, good, good. So I might put another shape on here. And so what I might do is I'm going to create maybe a diamond, if you like. So when you're drawing out shapes in Illustrator and drawing out a square in this instance, if you hold down Shift, it's going to be a perfect square. So that's really a cool thing that you might want to do from time to time. So I need to rotate this guy around a little bit. And if I hover over anything in Illustrator that's actively selected, I can hover and I can just rotate that around. Now, when you're rotating, you can eyeball it if you'd like, but you can also hold Shift, and that's going to lock it into, you know, 45s and so forth. So there's my little label kind of idea, and this is starting to look good. And hovering again, anytime you have a shape, you can smush it up and down and bits and pieces like that. So there's my central piece, if you like. I might just change the attributes of this. I might change the colour out a bit lighter. Maybe I'll make the stroke, white. See how this looks. That'll do for now. So I'm going to put this, ultimately this piece is going to go here. Now, one great thing about Illustrator is that it's not reliant as much on as with layers as Photoshop. So you can create layers in Illustrator, but typically with a simple graphic like this, you don't want to create too many layers. So I can stagger this. So this image is behind. So I'm going to control click or right click with your mouse, and I'm going to arrange that to the front. So he will now be my topmost object, and I can start to position my graphic the way that I like it. This is going well. So I'm just going to pull him off to the side while I continue working. I might put an effect, or I might just continue with my graphic here. So I'm going to have a little background piece here like so. And he might not have a stroke. He might be a slightly darker color. And again, I can click on this and right click with my mouse, and I can arrange to the back. That's looking good, you know, so just playing with the arranging. Very cool. That looks all right. So he's centering over like that. I'm going to put an effect on this thing, just going to make it like it's like a label. So I'm going to apply an effect from the effect menu on top of my screen, effect. And I've got some very cool effects here, but I'm looking for the zigzag. So I'm going to get this serrated sort of edge. So zigzag. And whenever you do an effect, if you have the ability, always preview it so you can see what you're doing before you accept it. And, you know, from here, it's a bit of slider mashing, guys. So I'm thinking that maybe that could look interesting for my label. Maybe I want to smooth curves. No, I don't. So it's just a matter of you playing with this thing and getting the look that you're after. So I'm okay with whatever I've done here. I'm going to say, okay, there it is. It's starting to come together. So I'm going to need some type on this thing here. I'm going to put some type on this. It's going to be my rum label. So I've just clicked and created a text box here, or a piece of text here. And again, I'm just going to scale that up. Give it a name. I'm going to call mine something or other. Maybe it's going to be called Red Sails. It's a pirate thing after all, so that's a bit piratey. So Red Sails. And I'm going to change my font. So I'm selecting my type tool. I'm going to change out my character. I should be able to pick a font here. And I've got a bunch of fonts available to me here. Yours, you know, wherever you are, you might have your own fonts available to you. If not, you can download them fairly easily from places like DeFont and Free Fonts and things like that. So, you know, type really does sometimes bring your graphics together. So this is going to be my whiskey label, my rum label, and I'm going to apply an effect to this label. So I've got my type tool. At the top of my screen, I've got this options bar up here. Here's my type. And up here, I've got the ability to give it a bit of a distortion. So I'm going to click onto that. And I've got these options. So I can choose any of these options, and some look better than others. And I'm going to go with the old arc. That could look good. That looks all right to me. Just a little bit of that. I'll say, okay. He's going to sit in there. Maybe I'll scale that down a little bit. There it is. That's starting to take shape nicely. I'm going to put a little banner across the bottom here. I want to, you know, make it look a little bit more authentic as a label, whiskey rum label. So I'm going to draw a little shape out with my shape tool. Something like that. Maybe we might make that, you know, maybe a little bit grayer. Who knows? Whoops. A bit grey so we can see it. That's going to sit in something like there. Fine. Something like that. And I'm going to put some type over the top of that too. So this could be premium blend or whatever it is you're doing. So you might have, you know, something completely different. Not a problem. So that's going to sit in there. And maybe I'll make that type. You know, maybe I'll make that white. That looks a bit better. That'd be fine. Now, things that belong together in Illustrator. This is one of my sort of methods. And so this is two things here. We've got a piece of text and a little piece underneath it. Things that belong together, as these things do, should be grouped together. So I'm going to right click with my mouse and I'm going to group those guys, which tends to make life easier. If you group things together, you know, just keep thinking that if those two items belong together, group them. There we go, Premium Blend. And I'm going to apply an effect to this thing. I'm going to, what am I going to do? I'm trying to warp it. So I'm going to do a similar thing, but with the graphic as well. So I'm going to do my arc. That looks pretty good. You can go either way, you know, whichever feels good. That will do for me. And there's my little taggy label style thing. You know, maybe give that, you know, maybe that could have a little stroke on it. Okay, that's starting to come together. All right, maybe one more thing. I'm going to make a star. I might draw a couple of stars in here, make this thing. So when you're drawing stars in Illustrator, and I'm just clicking and holding out the star shape tool, your up and down arrows, allow you to reduce the amount of stars in your shape or increase them. So that's a really nice tip. I'm going to make him black. Him over there. So I'm going to put that together. Make a copy. So when you copy things in Illustrator, when you want to copy a piece in Illustrator, so I've already got one star, I want another one over the other side. If I select it and I hold Option, I'm going to copy. So when I select something and I hold Option and drag, I'm going to get a copy. So that's just a really good way to get copies of things that already exist. So that's starting to come together. Maybe I'll just draw one more little circle and then we might apply our graphic. So there's my shape. Maybe I've got a piece of text on this thing. It might say 100% something or other. I don't know. That could look cool. So we're trying to make this thing look authentic. I want to have that an effect on that little circular doodah there. So I'm going to apply an effect to that as well. So I'm going to apply what are we going to do? We might do that zigzag thing again. A little bit of zigzag, just break it up a little bit. Preview it. Yeah, that looks all right. I'm going to go with that. And again, these two things that are together, should be grouped. So select them both with your black arrow, select them both and group them, Command G or Option Group. So they belong together. It's the best thing to group stuff together. There it is there. There's my label starting to come together. I think maybe we can put our pirate guy in now. And there he is. So he's starting to feel like a label. I think that'll do me for this exercise. I'm sure we can carry on with this for quite a bit longer, but just in the interest of keeping this tutorial short and to the point, that should be enough. Look, I hope that's been of use to you guys, and let's see what you can do. Can't wait to see it. All right, guys, I'll see you in the lesson.